Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, the death toll rises in a tragic construction accident in Tel Aviv. Trump supporters launch a campaign in the West Bank, and Israel collaborates on a science mission with some very unlikely partners. I'm Natasha Kirchak here with the latest news in Israel. Three people have now been confirmed dead in yesterday's devastating parking garage collapse in Tel Aviv, where rescue efforts are still underway to locate four others who are buried under the rubble in a desperate race against time. The body of a 28-year-old Ukrainian national was retrieved overnight following discovery of the first two fatalities yesterday. A massive search operation is still underway in the Ramat HaChayal neighborhood in hopes of locating the four construction workers still believed to be trapped by the cave-in. Contact with some of those victims broke off around 6:30 p.m. yesterday evening. So far, 5 people have been pulled out of the wreckage alive. Intensive recovery efforts are being conducted by 500 Israeli soldiers and officers working with several civilian volunteer organizations. At least 24 people have been injured in the collapse. Ahead of his departure for a state visit to the Netherlands this morning, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu personally came to the site after midnight, where he praised the challenging professional work of the search teams. Despite the fact that many construction workers in the Jewish state are Arab, as soon as news of the disaster broke, Palestinians and their supporters began celebrating. Social media has been flooded by anti-Israel hate groups welcoming news of the tragedy and cheering the rising death toll. It looks like Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump is getting a whole lot of support in the West Bank, where his supporters have now opened a campaign office. There are about 300,000 U.S. citizens in Israel, and an estimated 80,000 of them live in the West Bank, although it's unclear how many of them are eligible voters. The nonprofit group Republican Overseas Israel has now opened an office in the Jewish settlement of Karnei Shomron in an effort to get as many U.S. expats as possible to cast an absentee ballot for Donald Trump. Yet the initiative apparently has no official ties to the Trump campaign or the Republican National Committee.
So I just want to make it very clear that every dime, every agora that we have raised for this effort thus far has come from sources here in Israel, not from the Republican Party and not from the Trump campaign. Now there's a second side to the answer, and that is we are in coordination with them. We are in touch with them on a daily basis.
The office is not staffed full-time, but it will reportedly be used as a hub for outreach activity. While Republican Overseas Israel's chief strategist says there's no significance to the launch of ground operations in the West Bank, others may beg to differ. The Republican Party's platform recently omitted any reference to Israel as an occupier in the West Bank, and the co-chair of the organization says that Donald Trump has actively supported that stance. Everyone can agree, however, that the most important goal is to get American voters to vote from Israel.
This is not a political message or a symbol of any kind, but we are saying loud and clear that we will get to any American voter that want to vote in Israel and to want us to help him to act on his civilian duty and democratic right. And our message stay the same. Do the registration right now, because otherwise you can't vote later.
It's unclear if the Republican efforts are going to go far, because a recent poll of Jewish Israelis found that only 31% supported Trump, while 40% were in favor of Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. Although Republican supporters may be campaigning in the Holy Land, Israel really hasn't lived up to its reputation as the hot-button topic between the candidates. It doesn't look like anyone's feelings are getting hurt over it either, since it appears as though the 2016 campaign isn't something that Israel really wants to discuss. The New York Times just published an article by its New Jerusalem bureau chief focusing on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reluctance to comment on the American race. Several U.S. political figures are cited saying that during a recent 3-hour meeting with the Israeli leader, he completely evaded questions on the topic. Author Peter Baker wrote that while much of the rest of the world is absorbed by the contest between Donald J. Trump and Hillary Clinton, Netanyahu's virtual vow of silence is unusual. The article went on to suggest that the Israeli leader is trying to avoid becoming entangled in partisan politics that erupted back in 2012, when he hosted President Barack Obama's Republican challenger Mitt Romney in Jerusalem. Even though Netanyahu denied complaints from the Obama team that he was trying to influence the election's outcome, it would seem that this time around the Prime Minister is doing his very best to avoid even the semblance of taking sides in the race. It's not just the U.S. that's holding new elections this year. Turns out that Hamas is too, although no one really knows when, and it looks like there's only going to be one strongman who's allowed to run for leadership of the terror group's political bureau. And that's Ismail Haniyeh. We're all familiar with the Islamist boss who served 3 terms in Israeli prison for terrorist activity before being deported to Lebanon in 1992. He returned to Gaza 5 years later, becoming head of Hamas in 2005 and prime minister of the territory the following year. Even though he was dismissed by PA President Mahmoud Abbas in 2007, Haniyeh remains the de facto leader of the Strip. He's set to replace Khaled Mashal as head of the Gaza Strip whenever elections are held sometime this coming year. The 53-year-old is a sole candidate since all other contenders were apparently convinced to withdraw. Haniyeh already left Gaza Monday and will rule from Doha, where the political arm is located. Mashal has led the division since 1996, but his second 8-year term ended 3 years ago, and Hamas legislator forbids running for a third. Meanwhile, in related news, there was another cross-border skirmish between Israeli troops and Gaza terrorists overnight. Palestinians shot at IDF soldiers who returned fire at 2 Hamas posts, identified by local sources as belonging to the terror group's military wing. No injuries were reported on either side. In other operations, Israeli soldiers captured 6 alleged Hamas operatives in the West Bank and seized a weapons cache including explosives in an Arab village near Hebron. Whether you're a young student or a senior diplomat, if you're from Israel, you've most likely had to defend the image of the small country. The Jewish state is in a constant battle to improve its negative reputation worldwide, but movements like BDS continue to try to cut the country down. Ran Bar Yoshafat is one Israeli who decided to take action and go on a journey to inform the world about the real Israel, and he's here in the studio with us today to tell us all about it. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So to begin, what drives a young man like yourself to just leave everything behind and go and talk to strangers about Israel?
Well, you know, I served during the Second Intifada as a hand-to-hand combat expert. I still serve every year between 1 to 2 months in the Israeli Army Reserves. And in my mind, I was doing the most positive thing ever. I was protecting Jews, Christians, Muslims, innocent civilians against terror. The first time I came to the States, I've noticed that most people find me as the aggressor, as the negative character here. And I said, this has to be stopped. So just like I serve every year between 1 to 2 months in the Army Reserves, I feel like I kind of serve my country and I go and I try to improve Israel's image.
Interesting. Now, what did you discover during this journey? What was your most memorable experience going out abroad and talking about Israel?
So what really surprised me is that there's such a big difference in the discourse between here in Israel and outside of Israel. Here in Israel, we have political disputes. People can be more right-wing, left-wing. They want to build more settlements or less. Outside of Israel, mainly in college campuses, people don't want Israel to exist at all. They're talking about accusations that most Israelis have never heard of. The first accusation that I've heard when I went to a college campus in Seattle was Israel is systematically raping babies to scare the Arab population. And I thought, that's crazy. No Israelis would ever think that because we know the reality here. So that was the most shocking thing for me, that the difference in the discourse. One of my most memorable experiences was that I was actually able to make a difference. Because if you ask me, I would argue that most people in the world don't wake up in the morning and say, I wonder how Israel is doing. Most people want to, have a decent job, maybe settle down, get married, have kids. They're not focused on Israel. However, there is like the 5 to 15% who are very vocal against Israel. There's 5 to 15% who are very pro-Israel, and there's 70% in the middle. And that's where I want to reach. That's my targeted audience. And I've discovered that I can actually get these people to be with me, to be on board, because I'm telling the truth.
It's interesting. Where do you think this information is coming from? An accusation like that Israel is raping children. Where is that information coming from?
Unfortunately, that came from an Israeli, which is kind of funny because there's also a research that was conducted that why aren't we raping? Because in every situation of conflict, usually the more stronger side is committing rape.
Right,
So
the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been known for decades not having that issue.
So the conclusion was that one, we are too racist, and two, is that we don't want to increase the Arab birth rate. So I asked my teammate from the army, how come you guys don't rape? They said, look, demographics. I mean, at least you have to be honest. You cannot argue both arguments at the same time. You cannot be not raping because you're a rapist and raping systematically. That just doesn't go along. The accusations both came from Israelis, unfortunately.
Wow. All right. So, this book I see in front of you, why don't you tell us about what it contains and what drove you to write it?
So one of the most difficult part of my experience was that I was alone. I went to different college campus and people cursed me. They shouted very negative things at me and I was by myself. So I kind of had to vent. So how did I vent? I sent emails back to my friends, my family. I was like, this is what happened to me here. These accusations I've just heard for the first time. I couldn't believe it. So then when I came back to Israel, I said, I want Israelis to know what is happening there on the college campuses, sometimes in the churches. So I just took all of my letters and I kind of edited them down to a book. I'm not objective, but I think it's very fun to read. And it shows what is the situation outside of Israel and also how can you act, how can you be active in order to improve Israel's image.
Is this book also available in English for those who want to
No,
read it in the United States?
Actually, this book is aimed for Israelis. I'm working on my third book, which will be for North Americans, but this is my first book. It's aimed for Israelis who are not aware of what is happening in a college campus. I would argue that most students in college campuses notice when there's Israel Apartheid Week. So this is for Israelis only, but a lot of new Olim like to read this book because it's very simple. I maintain a very simple language. It's like letters. It's very personal. It's my experiences, my difficulties, my achievements. So a lot of new Olim ask me to give them the book so they can practice their Hebrew.
Now here's my question for you. When you were going on this trip, how did you choose which campuses to go to? What was that process like?
Well, the organization that flew me for this shlichut was Stand With Us. So they chose the college campuses for me. After that, different organization invited me for different occasions, but Stand With Us were in charge of setting the different schedule in different college campuses. And how did they choose it? According to wherever they thought it was more needed. For instance, I would argue that the vast majority of the American people are pro-Israel. They support Israel, but there are certain areas where it's different. For instance, the Pacific Northwest, the UCs, all of the UCs, they're more critical of Israel. So that's where I spent most of my time, in these areas.
Not a bad place to spend your time. Now, some people are calling this public diplomacy. Do you find the efforts that you have been doing in these colleges to be helpful, to actually have an impact on the people that you're speaking with?
Great question. So they've conducted a survey and they've noticed that every place that I went to, the support for Israel has grown by about 20%. I do believe that you can improve Israel's image. The only thing is that you need to put more efforts into it. And also I'm very happy that you call it public diplomacy, not hasbara, which is a word that doesn't exist in English, and I think that's one of the problems that we have. Because once I begin with hasbara, I'm being very apologetic, like I need to explain what I've done wrong. And this is public diplomacy, just like any other country is trying to create a positive image. Same for Israel, we're trying to present who we are, what we are, especially when we're being bashed from the other side.
What would you say is the biggest challenge that Israel is facing when it comes to its international image?
So first, let me say this. With all due respect to the international image, I will always be preferred to be hated because I'm strong than to be liked when I'm weak. So if you ask me what is my biggest challenge, we have more serious challenges than college students bashing Israel. But we need to change our terminology and we need to take the discourse to where we want to have it. For instance, you use the acronym the BDS movement. They're not the BDS movement, they're the movement to destroy Israel. That's their main objective. They know that they're not really going to hurt us economically, but they're trying to label Israel as the worst evil today. So that will, in the future, will make it more easy for other countries to attack Israel, and it will make Israel more difficult to react.
Is there anything that Israel could do, though, to try to improve that image, if at all?
Yes, and I think that Israel is doing it. I mean, it's very easy to criticize the government, and there's always place for criticism. It's healthy for a citizen to criticize the government, but the government is doing a lot of stuff. I would argue that the next challenge will be how to combine the government work and the civil society, because it wouldn't work without, one cannot work without the other. The civil society needs the information from the government. Sometimes it might need budgets from the government, and the government will need the civil society to work, different organizations such as Stand With Us, and also many others, to go and to do the groundwork that the government cannot do.
Now, this is kind of getting more into the specifics, but what are the most challenging topics that students in American college face when it comes to speaking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? So let's say you're at a dinner party and you come across somebody that speaks negatively about Israel. What do you teach these students to respond?
So I'll give you an example. A very common accusation is that Israel is an apartheid state. Okay, someone will tell me, look, an Arab from Ramallah and a Jew from Tel Aviv, they don't have the same rights. That is correct. The only thing is that the Arab from Ramallah doesn't have the same right as me because he's not an Israeli citizen, nor does he want to be, otherwise I wouldn't have a conflict. An Arab in Tel Aviv and a Jew in Tel Aviv have the full equal rights. If you're an Israeli citizen, you have full equal rights. Doesn't matter your religion, your ethnicity, nothing. I got my law degree from Salim Jubran, the Arab judge that sent my Jewish president to jail. If someone wants the Arab from Ramallah to have the same rights as a Jew from Tel Aviv, they're actually saying, you need to annex Judea and Samaria. So I'm not sure they understand what they're saying. Another common accusation is that Israel is committing an ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian, which is kind of interesting because in Gaza, Israel proper, and Judea and Samaria, their number has grown by about 10 times. So we're probably doing a very, very bad job. So these are some of the accusations that usually we hear. You have about 25 to 30 questions that repeat themselves. So I would say you need to divide it into two parts.
What about when it comes to the disparity between Arab Israelis living within Israel and Jewish Israelis living here? How do you kind of combat those issues?
Well, I give them some basic information. Again, Supreme Court's judge. The third biggest party in the Israeli parliament is the Arab Party. Muslim officers serving as high-rank officers in the Israeli Defense Forces. The ratio of Arab students in universities in Israel. To say that within Israel proper, Arabs are being treated differently, I would argue it's far from reality.
All right, well, finally, where can we get your book if we'd like to get a copy?
Well, this book you can find in Stimatsky in Summit Sfarim, and also you can order it online from flytotalk.co.il.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I will look forward to reading your book myself.
Thank you for having me.
Security forces in Israel remain on alert amid the release of a new video purportedly showing terrorists allied with the Islamic State carrying out joint operations in Syria, just a short distance away from the Jewish state's northern border. Intelligence gathering by the Israeli Army's Northern Command has been raised dramatically lately in order to carefully monitor activities of armed groups operating in southern Syria. Footage just released by Islamic State media shows a coalition of its jihadi faction advancing on the Yarmouk Valley region, which is located in the triple border junction between Israel's Golan Heights, Jordan, and Syria. The militants were filmed advancing on Syrian rebel positions in the embattled Dara province, where fighting has been heavy since a Syrian civil war erupted in 2011. Even though ISIS seems to be trying to solidify its presence in the area adjacent to Israel just a few miles from the border, so far the terrorists appear to be concentrating on fighting Syrian regime troops, and haven't yet posed an explicit threat against the Jewish state. Turkey has long been a key player in the Middle East, but recent events in the country have shown just how fragile the region truly is. Now, with Russian leader Vladimir Putin involved more than ever, will a Russian, Turkish, and Iranian strategic triangle emerge? ILTV's Steve Leibowitz sat down with Jerusalem Post editor Ilan Eviatar to find out more.
Ilan Eviatar, editor of the Jerusalem Report. In your most recent column in the Jerusalem Post, you ask the question, will a Russian, Turkish, Iranian strategic triangle emerge, or is it all just short-term tactical? What's the bottom line? What's the answer?
Well, Steve, I think the bottom line is that if we are going to see any kind of triangle emerge, it's going to be a tactical alliance, a short-term tactical alliance, because the sides quite clearly have opposing long-term interests.
what would you say are the opposing interests? Let's say, what are the main interests of Turkey and Iran and Russia in the region?
Right. Well, let's look at each of the sides. I mean, Turkey has come under heavy criticism in the West. Its relations with the West have soured, particularly in the wake of the coup. And even before that, we saw a more pragmatic realignment of Erdogan's foreign policy, seeking a rapprochement with Russia in late June before the coup. The normalization of ties with Israel, and we see them also seeking to strengthen ties with Egypt. And since realigning ties with Russia, they've also made overtures toward Iran. Turkey fears that the situation in Syria will lead to the emergence of a continuum of Kurdish control in northern Syria. And we saw the Turkish Prime Minister making comments yesterday that Turkey won't allow Syria to be divided along ethnic lines. And clearly he's referring to the Kurds. I don't think he really cares about the other ethnic lines. And we also see the Turks fearing a massive influx of refugees, a new influx of refugees from Syria.
Normally when I would hear Russian, Iranian, Turkish, triangle, alliance, I would be fearful for Israel's sake. Is there any reason to worry about this kind of an alliance from Israel's point of view?
No, I don't think we need to fear an alliance that would turn against Israel. First of all, both Russia and Turkey are seeking good ties with Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu meets regularly with President Putin. Trade between the two countries is strong. Israel and Turkey have normalized their relations, and we can expect to see trade ties continue to flourish between those two countries.
One would think that those facts would push Iran out of the equation, and yet you're saying that they are also part of this alliance.
Well, they were very pleased to see Turkey and Russia warm their ties. Iran sees an opportunity to move Ankara away from Saudi Arabia's anti-Iranian axis. Iran and Russia too have joint energy interests, but then on the other hand, in the long term, the differences between the sides are fundamentally opposed. Iran sees itself as Iran wants to achieve a crescent stretching from Iran through Syria onto Lebanon, a Shiite crescent. Turkey sees itself as a leader of the Sunni world, and so clearly they clash there, and there are also long-term strategic differences between Iran and Russia. Iran sees itself as an empire, Russia sees itself as a superpower.
So it's really an alliance because basically everyone hates Islamic State.
Indeed, perhaps the only place where they can truly cooperate is in the fight against Daesh, because all sides have a problem with the Islamic State.
Ilan Aviatar, Ilan Aviatar, editor of the Jerusalem Report. Thanks so much for being with us at ILTV.
Thank you.
Now, here's some news you definitely don't hear every day. Israeli scientists are working on a landmark science project, only this time they're collaborating with some unlikely colleagues from Pakistan and Iran. Yes, you heard me right. Researchers from the Jewish state are participating with their counterparts from the Muslim nations of Iran and Pakistan to create the Middle East's new particle accelerator. That's pretty remarkable since neither of those countries recognizes Israel. Egypt and Jordan are also involved in the $100 million project construction of the site, but that's not as noteworthy since they both signed peace accords with Jerusalem. The team is working on the synchrotron light for experimental science and applications, called Sesame for short. Other members of the Sesame group at large include Turkey, Cyprus, Bahrain, and the Palestinian Authority, which further complicates matters because Turkey doesn't recognize Cyprus either. The work is already underway at a site northwest of Amman, and the first experiments are expected to take place this autumn. Sesame is aimed at fostering regional excellence in the scientific and technological realms to prevent the brain drain of world-class researchers. The scientific director told the British Guardian newspaper that all of the parties are cooperating very well together, which is the dream. Even Iran apparently decided to cooperate with the Israelis on the project, even though 2 of its scientists who were involved in the project were assassinated in operations blamed on Israel's Mossad. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. They say you have 2 hands because one is to help yourself and the second is to help others. So today's word is yad, which means hand in Hebrew. Lots of hands make the workload light, which is why it doesn't hurt to tackle any obstacle yad beyad or hand in hand. Israelis have a deep appreciation for that, and every year Israel offers its yad to different countries around the world in need, whether it's to aid victims of an earthquake in Italy or put out destructive wildfires in Cyprus. While yad refers directly to a hand in the scriptures, it can also be used to talk about the power or craft of an individual or group. It makes sense since our hands give us the power to carry out the actions that our mind creates. So take your future into your own yadayim or hands, and while you're at it, offer your yad to those who need it. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Wednesday should be partly cloudy with a high of 86 degrees. The temperature should stay the same through Thursday, but the sun will be completely out. All right, everybody, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.76 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to check out our next update at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks for watching, and see you tonight.